In Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, we have the text for tonight's lesson, one of the most familiar passages in the Bible. This, of course, is early on in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. He, of course, is talking to individuals who, at least some of whom, will become part of that kingdom on the day of Pentecost, will be added to the church on the day of Pentecost. And so in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about the kind of individuals he wants in the kingdom. Their characteristics, their qualities, what kind of people they are to be. So in Matthew 5:13 he says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." And we want to concentrate and focus for a few moments on the first part of that particular passage. You are the salt of the earth. And as an introduction to show how indispensable salt is, there's a story about a king and his 3 daughters. You may have heard this story before, but I think it amply illustrates this importance. And so he asked his 3 daughters how much they loved him. So the oldest daughter says, "I love you more than all the riches in your kingdom, all the wealth, the gold and the silver and the jewels and the great houses." The king liked that answer. He says, "Wow, my daughter must love me." And so then he asked the middle daughter, "Well, how much do you love me?" She says, "I love you more than all the pomp and the circumstance of the court, all the how regal it is and how great and wonderful it is that you're king and that you rule over this kingdom." Well, he was very impressed with that answer. And then he asked the youngest daughter, "Well, how much do you love me?" He might have been expecting all kinds of answers. Her answer was, "I love you more than salt." Well, he was just taken back, and it made him angry, and he scolded her. "What do you mean telling me you love me more than salt?" And so he sent her away. Well, the court chef overheard what had happened. And he understood what the youngest daughter was saying, so he decided, "I know what I'll do to the king to show him." He says, "I'm going to leave out all the salt from the king's food the next day." And so that's what he did. No food in anything the next day. And boy, by the end of the day, the king was angry. He said his food was bland. It didn't have any life to it. There was no zest to it. He didn't even enjoy eating. And so he asked the chef, "What'd you do?" He says, "Well, I left the salt out." He says, "Well, why'd you do that?" He says, "I wanted you to see how much your youngest daughter loved you." And then he realized that his youngest daughter probably loved him most of all, because salt was indispensable to his life. Without it, his life lacked what it needed. There was no joy in his life, no zest in his life. Jesus is telling his would-be followers in Matthew 5:13 that there's an indispensable quality about salt that they must be. Those characteristics that salt have must be shown, exemplified in their lives if they're going to be the preservative to society that they need to be. They're to be indispensable to society. They're to be valuable to the culture. And see, we want to very briefly look at 4 qualities of salt that most of us know very well, but apply it to how does it affect me? When God tells me to be salt of the earth, how is that going to change how I live tomorrow? And that's why it's important. Quality number 1, salt enhances flavor and creates a desire to eat and drink. Well, when the world observes us, as they do every day, as they did today, as they will tomorrow, regardless where you are, somebody's observing you. And so when they observe a Christian's life, what should that do? It should enhance them. And by that I mean it should cause them to want what you have. In other words, you're so different than they are in how you talk, your response to circumstances, to your state in life, how you deal with others. They should see something so different about you that they want it. Because the Bible is very clear that there's the only place to find peace and rest and contentment is in Christ. It's the only place that exists. So therefore the Christian's the only one that truly possesses peace and contentment and rest. And so this quality of salt that we're to have means that when people see us or around us, they observe and examine us, then they want what we have. And they want to find out what it is. What is it about you? Why are you different? Why don't you act like everybody else? Titus 2 verse 10 says this is adorning the doctrine. Remember that long list from Titus chapter 2, 1 through 8? It talks about the older men and younger men, the older women and younger women, and how they are to act toward others. And it talks about servants. And then at the end, he says, when all of these people, the younger men and the older women and so forth, when all of them are acting like Christ, that adorns the doctrine. That makes the teaching of Christ attractive. And that's what salt is to do. It's to make the life that we have attractive to people. If people don't want what we have, then something is wrong with us somewhere. I mean, there's something not attractive about our lives. Whatever it is. There's something there missing. Just like the salt missing from the king's meals. We're to add something to society. Society is to be better off because we're living in it. Our culture is to have a higher standard of morality because we're living in it. And therefore, because of that, we cause others to want to have it. Remember when Jesus was talking with the woman in the well in John chapter 4, talking about having coming to me and drinking of the type of water that would be everlasting. He says, if you go to this well of Jacob, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to continue to drink from it. But he says, if you drink of the water that I give to you, it's going to be an everlasting drink. You know, we're to live in such a way, Jesus says, that people want to come to Jesus and have that drink. Drink of that water that lasts forever. So something we do, the way we live and talk and relate to people and accept circumstances and how we respond to crises maybe in our life, how we respond to people who are ugly, and the world is filled with ugly people. I don't mean how they look. I mean how they act on the inside. I think there's an ugliness epidemic in our society. Because it seems like it's everywhere you go, people act ugly and rude. And so how we respond to that ugliness and that rudeness, people are going to be noticing that. Do we come back with ugliness and rudeness that's just a little more ugly and a little ruder than what we received? And so when people see us and how we respond and how we talk and what we do, it's to cause them to want Christ. Remember Paul talked about in Galatians 2:20 about Christ living within him. And when we're baptized, of course, we're told that we put on Christ so that people start to see us. And that's the idea. We're adorning the doctrine. We're making Christ attractive to people so that they will want Christ as well. If people are around us day after day and hour after hour, and they have no more desire to have to know about Christ or to have what we have, then we're not making it attractive in some way. So we want to make sure we live like Christ wants us to live. And that's being the salt of the earth. That's one quality about salt. It enhances flavor. There's another quality, though. The next one is that of being, it has strength. And by that I mean, this kind of comes from a science standpoint. Sometimes when you, especially this was done in past, if you had a cut, and especially if it was pretty deep, and if you wanted to kill the bacteria in it, and all the nasty little microscopic stuff, what would you do? You'd pour salt on it. Hurt like crazy. But it would kill the bacteria. Salt has that power. And so there's a characteristic when Jesus says you're the salt of the earth. That's one of the things that it does. What does salt do? It kills weeds and grass. If you got a space in your yard or somewhere that you want to get rid of any living green thing, you just pour some salt on it. Kills it. Okay? It has strength and it has power. It can even kill certain insects. Well, now for us, Christian salt is to kill ungodliness, ungodly practices, wicked lifestyles. You know, the Bible says in Romans 1:16 that the gospel is powerful. It's powerful. Salt is powerful. The gospel is powerful. Our lifestyles are powerful. You know, it talks about not, the very next verse, about not letting our light be hidden. We don't put something over it so people can't see it. What do? We let people see how we live. And when they ask us, why aren't you going to the dance? Or why aren't you going to drink with us? It's only a cigarette. Then when we have that brought up, then we have an enormous opportunity to let our light shine. Well, this is why I don't do this, and this is why I don't do that. That's letting our light shine. So it accomplishes two things. Number one, we are setting a good example for other people. But number two, we're also teaching people why. People need to know the why behind it. Yes, the what's important, but the why is too. Why don't we do these things? Why don't we participate in certain activities? The why is important. And so salt possesses strength. Our lifestyles possess strength. We can change our society. We can change our society. If we live in the Word and we show the Word and people see the Word, we can change society. You know, when we look at going all the way back to ancient times in the Old Testament, classic example, of course, is that wonderful old city of Sodom. When it got to the point when there wasn't enough salt in that city, what did God do? He destroyed it. There wasn't enough. For God to keep that city going, there had to be a certain minimum level of salt there. And there wasn't. So what did He do? Well, He destroyed it. And we see that throughout times in the Old Testament. When there weren't enough righteous people, God would destroy it. And there's a tremendous lesson, I think, for our country. You know, we have a great responsibility, because when we as God's people stop having that influence in our society, because we do have strength by living the gospel life. When we stop making that difference, then maybe there's going to come a time when God says, okay, we've dropped below that minimum level. It's time for the United States to be gone. And there may not be a United States of America anymore. Of course, I have no idea where that level would be. No idea whatsoever. But I know I have a responsibility to exert as much influence as possible wherever I am. And that's part of my responsibility, and every Christian has that responsibility. That's a characteristic of salt, is that power and that strength for good. To kill what's bad, like the bacteria and the weeds and bad insects and so forth. Well, see, that's what we do. We put to death certain evil and wickedness. And then when we can influence, if we can just influence one person to stop drinking, then we've raised the morality level in our country just a notch there. That's the idea. You are the salt of the earth. It does possess strength and power. The third characteristic is, of course, one that many of you know, especially if you were raised on a farm in years past, and that is its preserving quality. Salt was necessary to preserve. Back, of course, when Jesus gave this lesson in Matthew 5, the fishing industry was big. And the fishing industry needed salt to preserve the fish. They obviously didn't have any sort of mechanical refrigeration. So salt was it. So if they wanted to preserve their fish for any length of time, it had to be salted down, because salt had that preserving quality. It would keep it. Well, going along with what we just said, Christians have that preserving quality in our world. We have a saving influence in our world. And maybe it should be part of our prayers whenever we say them during the day or night, is that those of us who are Christians will exert the greatest influence we have in the world, in our society, on others, on who we work with. And again, if we can just preserve a little part of the society, the area in which we live, then we have raised that level of morality and goodness in our world just a little bit. And that may be just enough so that God says, okay, I'm going to let this country go a little while longer. You don't know. But I do know this, that every time we help somebody come to Christ, every time we exert some positive influence, we are helping preserve our country. Now that is a fact. There's no doubt about that. We are helping preserve our country. So every good thing we do like that is important, and we can't just neglect and say, I'm just one person out of 270 million. You're one person, and that one person can exert a great influence. And we need to make sure we do that everywhere we are. And again, it doesn't make the slightest bit of difference where we are, or even if we don't think it's that big a deal. It is a big deal. We can exert an influence and help preserve our society, because our society needs preserving. Our society has certainly gone down, morally speaking, since I was my kid's age, drastically. There's no one that could possibly deny that statement. It is so obviously true. You know what happened, of course, in the days of Noah? Millions of people probably on the face of the earth. Millions and millions of people. There weren't enough righteous people for God to preserve the world. He says 8, that's not enough. That's just not enough people. So God said, I'm going to start over. And that's exactly what He did. Started over. Preserving, that's what we have to do. And lastly, salt adds zest and flavor. I just want to read a little quote from a preacher down in Texas by the name of Jerry Moffat. It says, the greatest danger which confronts the church is not that it may die. The church will not die. The ever-present danger which always lurks before a church is that it may become insipid, that it may stand for nothing in particular. Jesus was giving expression to His fear that His truth and His cause might be committed to those who would lose the bitingly Christian flavor which characterized His way of life. Those who stand for nothing will fall for everything. That's what He was saying. You know, a Christian's life cannot be insipid. It can't be lukewarm like those people in Revelation chapter 3. It cannot be lukewarm. Lukewarm Christianity does nobody any good. It doesn't do the Christian any good. It doesn't do anybody around the Christian any good. That's why Jesus' response in Revelation 3 was, I wish that you were either hot or cold. Because you're lukewarm, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. Because you're not doing anybody any good in any way. That salt, as he says there in Matthew 5:13, loses its flavor. That's what he says in Revelation 3. It's the same thing. When we become lukewarm in our Christianity, that's when our salt loses its flavor. That's when the salt loses its strength, its power, its good preserving characteristics. And there's no zeal and flavor left in it. You know, we have to show to the world that living for Christ is the best thing that ever happened to us. And when we talk to them, we need to show that we're enthusiastic about church, about attending church. Now, if they see that we're not all that thrilled about attending church services, I know one thing that will never happen, and that is they won't come with you. That's a guarantee. Won't happen. So salt adds zest and flavor to life. One person wrote, we Christians have no business being boring. You know, the Christians in the first century were not boring. What did they do? They turned the world upside down. Every time they went into community, whether it's Peter or Paul or John or whoever, that community was changed. It was changed. They were not boring Christians. They didn't go into a community and nobody knew about them. They knew about them. They filled Jerusalem with the doctrine, the very beginning. And the people then didn't hold back. They didn't hold back anything. If it meant going to prison, fine. And they did, often. Paul suffered all kinds of unimaginable things to us. Didn't stop them one bit. Didn't stop them. Because that salt he had was full of zest and flavor. You know, sin in the first century was sin. Sin today is sin. It hasn't changed. I admire people when they're able to go into a bigger city or wherever, knowing that they're going to be laughed at or ridiculed or whatever when they teach and preach the truth. When they know it's going to happen to them. Well, they're absolutely positive it's going to happen to them. And yet they do it anyway. That's what happened in the first century. That's the kind of salt that adds zest and flavor and changes the world. We need to change the world. I have somewhere at home a box of salt. I don't really know where it is because I don't cook or anything. But it's there somewhere in the house. And it's probably blue. It seemed like I remember it being blue. One thing I do know about that box of salt, that as long as it stays in the cabinet, it doesn't do anybody any good whatsoever. It just stays in the cabinet. So for salt to have any power, it has to come in contact with something. To preserve meat, it has to come in contact with the meat. To kill the grass, it has to come in contact with the grass. So the salt has to be taken out of the box, out of the shaker, and actually come in contact with something before it can exert its influence. And that's the final point. You and I, if we're going to be salt of the earth, we have to come out of the salt shaker. It has to be more than just us meeting here. Yeah, that's absolutely essential, as we talked about this morning. But if we're really going to influence society, society is not in these four walls. And we shouldn't expect vast multitudes to pour into this building. So if we're going to affect society in a positive way, preserve society, change society, make Christ attractive to society, then it must be done outside these four walls. That's where it happens. So number one, to have these characteristics, one has to be a Christian first. One must have experienced that new birth that Jesus talked to Nicodemus about. Being born of water and the Spirit. But then that person, when they come up out of the waters of baptism, cannot just stay by the waters of baptism. They must move out into the world. The church grew in the first century extremely fast when it was persecuted. When those people had to be scattered. And what did they do? And those that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the gospel. They went out into the world to exert their influence. And that's what we as Christians have to do. And I would ask you, as we think about the words of the song John has chosen, to think about what kind of salt have I been? Have I been preserving society? Have I been making the doctrine of Christ attractive? Have I been adding zest and flavor to the world in the sense that I've been raising the standard of morality? And if I haven't been those things, then tonight's the night to do something about it. And if it is, then I would ask you to come as we stand and sing this song.